Welcome back, everyone. How are we all doing? I hope you're liking, subscribing, and sharing with your friends and family. We really appreciate you. And we have a real treat of a guest today. We have Scott Walker, who is the man you call when you're in a bit of a pickle, when someone has been taken, someone's been taken hostage. Maybe it's cybercrime, maybe it's in the boardroom. But Scott is a ex-Scotland Yard detective, a military intelligence operator, and one of the world's leading negotiating experts, especially in kidnap for ransom and crisis negotiation. So Scott, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Looking forward to the conversation.
Vice versa. This has been I usually ask friends and family about questions to ask. And this one has just been like flooded with things because I think it's a human universal, right? It's not everyone cares how much vitamin C they put in their granola in the morning, but everyone at some point has an experience with negotiating. I think, try and understand that and get a grasp of that is a very human and real thing. So super excited about our conversation. First question for you, which is over your course of your career, military intelligence and working with Scotland Yard and negotiating in all sorts of different contexts, what has surprised you the most?
I think what has surprised me the most is, let me take it back to a question I discovered very early on in my career, actually, was around, I think it was attributed to Einstein. Now everything worth saying or doing in life these days is attributed to either Einstein, the Dalai Lama, or the Navy SEALs, and this one's going to be attributed to Einstein. It's the most important decision you'll ever make is, do we live in a friendly or an unfriendly universe? So is life inherently good? Are people inherently good? Or are they driven by some malevolent intent? And bear in mind, I've spent 20 plus years as a detective in the military and as a kidnap negotiator. I have to say, the thing that's really still surprises me to this day is that we live in a friendly universe. People are inherently good. Yes, there are small pockets, so let's call it badness or evil or malevolence or manipulation, but 90% of life is actually pretty darn good, and people are pretty darn good too.
That's so refreshing to hear, because my background is health startups and things like this, and I like to believe in the win-win, in the, we're expanding the pie together. It's not about what I want, it's about how we can both get there collaboratively. But then you do come across some people who take a different form, which is like very win-lose negotiation, right? So I guess when you're talking about people who are intuitively good, do you think that they come to a negotiation from the point of view they're looking for a win-win?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let's just put a caveat around this term negotiation. Most people will run a mile if you ask them to negotiate. Yet you and I, and in fact all 8 billion of us, are negotiating every single day, because what is a negotiation if it's not a conversation with a purpose? And all you're looking to try and do is influence and persuade or bring about some form of cooperation or collaboration. That could be with a podcast guest for you. It could be maybe with teenage kids. It could be with your boss, clients, whomever it happens to be. And so I think most of us inherently are doing the win-win, approaching a win-win anyway. And if you look back through history, we needed this win-win, this sense of reciprocity to survive as a species. And of course, you can play hardball, you can really hammer people on price or terms and conditions or whatever it is. But what you want to do, you want to get to a place where there is a queue of people wanting to come and do business with you. There's a queue of people wanting to come and work for your company. And you do that by creating an environment where it is a win-win. And you don't have to necessarily compromise much, if at all, to achieve that. Yes, you might need to be a bit more agile and be a bit more flexible around it, but you certainly don't have to sacrifice or compromise your values, your beliefs, your boundaries, or whatever. And so I think most of us do approach things with a win-win. Because here's the thing. Everybody involved in a negotiation or a conversation with a purpose needs to walk away feeling like they've got a good deal. They may not have got the deal they initially wanted, but if you and I are trying to agree a deal, it could be the sale of a car, or it could be the release of hostages or business deal, or with our partner, we're going on holiday. If one of us feels like we've been had over, we've been ripped off, it's been an unfair outcome, that's going to breed resentment. It's going to breed discontent. And as I said, it's about long-term cooperation and collaboration. And that can be achieved if we approach it with a more win-win as opposed to win-lose.
Okay, so in my career, I try and aim for like a win-win all the time. And like, it's my only sort of, it's one of my lenses I'll go into a negotiation with. Like, okay, I want them to feel like we got a really good deal here, and vice versa. But you've often experienced negotiations in different contexts where this is a one-time thing. You don't expect to be negotiating again with some Somali pirate. At least you hope not. So how did you approach those kinds of negotiations where it's not, you don't expect to be doing business for the next 30 years with someone who kidnapped someone, right? So how do you approach those kind of things?
Yeah, here's the interesting thing is actually negotiating with the kidnappers was the easy bit, because they were just businessmen looking to get a good deal. I would actually spend 80% of my time on a case dealing with and negotiating with and placating and navigating the emotions and egos of my own side. So the client, the company, the family, and we call it the crisis within the crisis. And 80% of my time was spent with this sensory acuity, I call it. This is big. Imagine a big radar on the top of your head, and you're scanning for the internal politics, the competing demands, the siloed thinking, the egos at play, the identities that are being bruised. And so that's where I had to focus most of my attention. And I couldn't allow that to derail me from actually what was my main focus, which was the safe and the time of the release of the hostages. And so I would approach it with, I need to, first of all, establish credibility really, really, really quickly. And from there on in is actually do more listening than talking, to bring more curiosity than assumption to the conversations, because assumptions are just like expensive earplugs. They get in the way. They prevent you from really understanding what lies behind the, let's call it the disruptive behavior or the comments. What are the real emotional needs and the drivers that are leading a family member or the chief operating officer or whoever it is to act and behave in the way they're doing?
Okay, so you're coming at it through this lens of exploring as opposed to putting your own, like, I think I know what you want already, so I'm going to try and give you that, if I hear you right.
Yeah, so very quickly, there's no point me saying, well, yeah, I've done 300 cases and I'm some kind of superstar hotshot negotiator. I wouldn't be in the room unless I had a certain level of experience and credibility. But quite quickly, I had to demonstrate that, as I said, that actually, if you listen to me, we're going to get people back. But I can't go in there and say that in such a way because it just puts people's back up. So quite quickly, it's, right, this is what is likely to happen. Okay, we're not going to hear anything for the next 7 to 10 days. But when we do hear something, this is likely to be the play. And then lo and behold, 7 to 10 days later, it would happen. And you start to build that credibility and trust, which is the golden thread through all forms of conversations and negotiations. And I would also do some preparation though. And so I would really encourage your listeners and viewers that if they're going to have a difficult or meaningful or a really important conversation in whatever context, is do a little preparation. Because in times of stress or challenge or conflict, we rise or fall to the level of our preparation. It's like it's a muscle memory. The more you can do this and the more you can kind of prepare, the easier it becomes when that thing actually happens or if it happens. And I call it the bunch of fives. Imagine the palm of your hand, right? And so as part of the preparation, whilst I'm on the plane flying out to meet the client or what have you, I'm thinking, okay, what are the top 5 challenges, issues, questions, threats, problems, obstacles, whatever it is in the context that are likely to get thrown up here? They're likely to get in the way. And if I can do a bit of preemptive thinking and planning, when it does happen, I can go, yes, I knew this was going to happen. I knew this problem or question was going to get thrown at me, and it doesn't knock me off course. And that preparation helps me to master and display the number one skill of all of the world's best negotiators and communicators, I'd say as well. And that is emotional self-regulation. You think about it, those people who allow their emotions to get the better of them, and we all experience high and low emotions. So it's not about not feeling them. It's not allowing them to take control. If you can self-regulate, in my previous case, it would be there's a mock execution. I'm sat with a family and the kidnappers are doing a mock execution of their loved one, or they're refusing to put them on the phone as part of a proof of life with a company. So imagine all those high emotions and challenges that the family and the company experiencing. Well, I had to make sure that I was self-regulated, because if I'm flapping, how do you think that's going to work out for the others as well?
That's super fascinating. So I read a book called The Wisdom of Psychopaths a couple of years back.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with it. Brilliant book. I'm not saying you're a psychopath or not, Scott. I'm sure you're not. I'm sure you're a lovely man. But I can imagine that they make a nice point in the book of like, okay, you need some element of psychopaths in society, because if you're in a war zone and there's guns and bullets flying everywhere, who's going to do the emergency operation right there and there and keep it completely level? Something like that. Now, I'm sure you're not a psychopath and things like this, but do you think you were born a certain way where being cool customer in those scenarios is slightly easier for you, or what was that very much learned?
I think everybody has the ability to do this. So it's trainable, although some people are more naturally inclined to it than others. It's like any skill set. You know, if you're more introverted than extroverted, if you're more process-driven, data-driven, or you're more intuitive, you know, we all have these behavioral preferences, I guess, in terms of how we respond. But a lot of it is trainable. And what I learned through experience, and I'll give you a little story in a second, of the importance of observing, not absorbing. So, you know, when you get that trigger, when you get that snarky comment made to you, you get that threat, or you get that someone questions your judgment or your integrity, you kind of feel it rising inside. You know, the blood's boiling. It is observe but don't absorb. It means, yeah, I feel pissed off and frustrated, but I don't dwell in the pity party. You know, it's imagine a river. You stood on the banks of the river, and the river is all the swirling emotions and beliefs and everything else that's just going by you. And what happens initially is we'll get that trigger, which is like someone just pushing you, and you almost fall into the river, or you either fall into the river or you manage to stop yourself. But the point is, if you do fall in, you just get yourself out. You don't go floundering downstream for the next few hours or the next few days out into the ocean, where some people do end up, and they'll just get into a negative spiral. And it's about really identifying, there are 3 buckets, all right? There's a bucket you can control what goes on, there's a bucket you can influence, and there's a bucket you just ignore. And for most of us, what we can control or influence is very, very small amount of things. We can control or influence maybe what the mood will give things, how we respond rather than emotionally react to pressures and to triggers and to stress. But most of it, we just need to ignore it. It's just noise that's getting in the way. And again, I learned a technique of simply, again, a 3-step technique was to pause, take a couple of breaths, reset, right? Okay. And now choose mindfully, proactively, deliberately choose. All right, this has just happened. Right. Now what do I need to do or think or feel? And he brings a bit of intentionality. And as I said earlier, it's like a muscle. You don't go to the gym once expecting to get super fit, healthy, and strong. You have to go all the time or frequently. And it's the same with emotional regulation and about negotiation and being comfortable in difficult conversations. And life gives you plenty of opportunity to practice this day in, day out. And yeah, so that's how a very quick example, a quick story is my very first kidnapping case. It was 2:00 in the morning. I received a phone call, and it's always 2:00 in the morning. It's never Wednesday lunchtime, and I'm at my desk and nothing else to do. And it'd be like, it'd be great to get a case now. Either I'll be like taking the kids swimming lesson, or as I said, 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning. And so jump in the car and I race across London. And I get there. My job at that time was just get amongst the family, take hold of the phone that the kidnappers are phoning on because their youngest son had been kidnapped a few hours previously by a drugs gang. Case of it was a mistaken identity. And I'm getting into it. I'm kind of practicing and doing all the training about validating and just trying to get some information and telling them what they need to say or not say to the kidnappers if they phone. But after a while, they're just not really listening or following through with what I'm asking them to do. And so after about 24 hours, 36 hours, they're just almost ignoring me. I'm thinking, why aren't you just, what if you just do X, Y, and Z, we're going to get your son back. What is wrong with you people? Why can't you get this? And so I'm coming out worse that effect. This was nearly the shortest career in kidnap negotiation. And then I find there was a hand on my shoulder. And this was the far more experienced colleague of mine who just squeezed my shoulder just enough to interrupt my pattern, that then allowed me to go, oh, take a breath, pause. My choice then. So I pause, I reset, and I chose to take a step back and then watch him be all Yoda-like. And just, it was a masterclass in how to influence and persuade and really manage these buckets and observe but not absorb. And actually, what I'd failed to realize in that very first case, which is what Charles Duhigg talks about in his book Super Communicators, is around you've got to know what type of conversation are you having. Is this a straightforward problem solving? Is it somebody who's actually looking, for a bit of advice? Is it an emotional one? Somebody just wants to express or vent, or is it more of a social kind of connection? And I was straight into this practical problem solving, but I hadn't spent the time to really understand the family needed this, that they were having an emotional conversation.
Mm.
And that was a real wake up call to just be more mindful of that and realizing if you really want to influence and persuade somebody, particularly if you're disagreeing on something, is to realize it's not about you. It's not about you. Yes, you will get what you want eventually, but until the other side, the person feels that you can demonstrate your understanding of where they're at, which is simply empathy in action, really, is you haven't earned the right to do that, which is why that cliche, seek first to understand before being understood, has been around for thousands of years. Is because it's true and it's accurate.
Mm. Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. On the understanding which kind of conversation you're having, I think most guys in a heterosexual relationship will understand that intuitively of, okay, there's a problem I'm trying to fix and I'm trying to solve and whatever it is, when actually it's more actually I just want you to listen and understand as opposed to try and solve. But yeah, great book, really interesting book. But that book hadn't come out by the time being trained, right? So how do they train you guys when you're learning this stuff?
Yeah, there's a couple of paths here. There's and definitions and terminology matters here. You've got like the hostage and crisis negotiation unit, which managed all of this. But there's a track which is around somebody's barricaded. There's a bank robbery gone wrong. Or usually a domestic situation. Usually the guy is holding his girlfriend hostage because he's found out she's been cheating, or he's drunk and he's threatening to hurt her, or somebody wants to self-harm or take their own life. So there's that element which made up the bread and butter of the negotiator, certainly in the police context. And there's a 2-week course for that, both in the UK, Scotland Yard, and the FBI, etc. And then there's another track which is predominantly around the kidnap for ransom side of things. And so my experience was really around responding more to the kidnapping side, where very, very quickly I needed to get alongside, in that case then was the family, and along with another negotiator was, okay, well, what are we going to get the family to say, in what order, for what outcome, to the kidnappers? And in the background, there'd be lots of other activity going on to try and maybe rescue the hostages. And then in the outside of the police, when I left the police, I then went into effectively do that full time, but for big corporations and high net worth individuals. And so the training was very, very similar, but different. As in, you want to try and get somebody to put the gun down or step back from the ledge or let somebody go from a bank. That is definitely the active listening, the empathy, the rapport, building the trust. And that's very similar to what I would do with the families or the clients in the kidnapping case. But as a kidnap negotiator, there was far more at play there. You was very much problem solving as well. Whereas as a negotiator in a hostage or crisis situation in the police context, you go nowhere near the problem solving. Your role is just to listen and communicate with whoever is in the stronghold. Whereas in a kidnapping case, kidnap negotiation, I'm actually not speaking to the kidnappers. I'm working with a communicator, a family member, whomever, to say what we want them to say. And usually we'll do that through somebody who speaks the local language, because it's not always English that's at play here.
Okay,
so
that makes
they're the differences.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was funny. I was speaking to my mum ahead of this conversation. I was like, "Oh, I've got this religion guy called Scott Walker coming on." Told the story, and she was like, "Oh, it reminds me of this guy called Terry Waite. I never heard of Terry Waite. I don't know. Loosely, someone in our family knew him, but he was apparently a negotiator. He got kidnapped himself."
He was. He worked for the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he was out in the Middle East. He was like the envoy, special envoy, and one of his jobs was to sit at the diplomatic level on behalf of the Archbishop of Canterbury to negotiate with terrorist groups and foreign governments the release of certain hostages, Western hostages, who had been taken on behalf of religious organizations. And he himself got taken for 5 years, most of which was in Lebanon, most of which was in solitary confinement. And this goes back to the point that we spoke about earlier. He was saying, and in his book, Taken on Trust, it's a great read. And he was saying, okay, the guards, the hostage takers here, they can beat me, they can chain me to a radiator, they can do all of this stuff, but they are never, ever going to be able to take my mind. Which is why he then came out and was able to, eventually reintegrate back into society. Of all the debriefs of hostages I've done over the years, there's a similar pattern. There's a theme there. The ones who come out and actually go on to live just as good, if not even better lives as a result of their ordeal, are the ones who are able to take control, to have agency of their mindset and the meaning they give things. And now this is not the same as some kind of toxic positivity about, hey, we're going to be home by Christmas, this is great. No. You're still going to get frustrated and down and depressed and despondent, but you're just not going to stay there. And you realize that you've got to take part in your own rescue. And this is so applicable to life these days, in my experience, is everybody wants to either blame somebody else or outsource the responsibility for getting better to somebody else. But here's the thing, it's on you. Now, there's something called wise optimism here that Terry Waite and other hostages and people who thrive after ordeals, they call it post-traumatic growth. And this wise optimism is really hope with its sleeves rolled up. And so again, this is not unicorns and rainbows and the world's such a great fluffy place. It's accept reality for what it is. Yeah, it's a pretty shit situation we find ourselves in now. This could be in business, the market's tanked, we've lost a lot of customers, this has happened, or going through a divorce, or there's an illness in the family. You can't bury your head in the sand. You've got to accept, okay, this is where we are. But from that place, have the agency to go, right, now what can I do about it? And there's always something you can do about it. The most important one is reframe it into an empowering vision for the future of taking steps and ownership that you can bring about some kind of positive change. It doesn't matter where it was in the world, the age, the culture of the hostages, and indeed people who've gone through hardships and come out the other side. This is the theme and the pattern that is shown up. If people are also looking for another good recommendation to read, it's Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I was in the concentration camps. witnessed and experienced himself horrendous ordeal, but he came out and he realized actually the ones who survived that ordeal and then went on to live great lives afterwards were the ones who realized, hey, it's down to me to choose the meaning I give this situation and then to take responsibility of what I'm going to do about it.
There's a load there. I mean, a whole boatload of things to unpack. We could go down loads of different tangents. I guess upstream of hope with its sleeves rolled up and agency, I guess, is sort of having a growth mindset and this kind of having this perceptionist reality mindset where, okay, there's the situation, but I can make it worse or better with my thoughts, right? But I guess it goes back to your main point, or the number one rule, which was keeping your sort of emotional fortitude, right? Making sure you keep that equanimity. So, and actually, funny, as you said that, 2 negotiations I've had in the last 6 months, one I completely butchered. I completely dropped the ball. It was crap, really bad. And partly because I didn't quite know what I wanted going into it, which I'd love to touch on. But also, I wasn't as prepared as I would like to be. So I thought they were going to ask questions here, and they threw a curveball at me, and it was a complete blind spot, and it threw me. And negotiations where I felt like I've showed up in a good way have been where there are no blind spots. So when you're working with sort of executives or whoever it would be, what does that preparation look like? Like, how do you really help someone prepare?
That's a great question. There is such a thing, even though I said earlier it's important to prepare, you can over-prepare.
Okay.
Because if you over-prepare, i.e., like what you've just said there, you've gone in thinking, okay, I know about these people, I've got experience here. Be careful of the cognitive bias thing kicking in here as well. Is you're not bringing as much curiosity, as I said before. There's lots of assumptions there, and that is when you're going to get that left field sabotage or 11th hour where the deal falls apart because you have not picked up what is truly important to that person in the moment. And there's something called the empathy loop, where it's about you constantly checking in and reflecting your understanding of where the other side are at. So what I'm hearing you saying, Ben, is in that last negotiation, you kind of took a few things for granted, perhaps, and you missed the opportunity to demonstrate a deeper understanding of where the other person was at in that conversation.
Yeah, I think I probably did. Definitely.
So that's a case of, okay, I'm reflecting back to you what I heard, and you may go, actually, that wasn't quite how it was, Scott. It was more this. Okay. And then I just do the same again. And we just go into this loop constantly checking in. It's almost from a sales perspective, you're test closing all the time. Am I understanding you correctly?
Okay.
But I must go in with even though I've done the preparation, I'm still going in with a blank piece of paper or blank mindset of, why? Tell me, what's the problem? What's the issue here? Where you're at with this? You tell me. Okay, so what is it about that that's really important to you or that's causing you lots of challenges? Okay, how can I best help or support you? What does that look like? And so there's the power of questions, but also it doesn't sound like an interrogation. You can just drop in other things, like as we've just covered, a bit of paraphrasing or summarizing or, emotional labeling. It looks like, it sounds like, it seems like, Ben, that you're a bit frustrated that it didn't go quite as well as you hoped last time. And what I'm doing there is I'm just labeling my interpretation of your experience. And you may go, no, it wasn't that. I was just a bit disappointed, And so again, great. It's people will give you everything you need to know in order to help them get what they want. If you can influence and persuade somebody, help them get what they want, and you will then get what you need. Absolutely no problem at all.
It's this lovely, I don't know if you've read the book called Obliquity, where it's fascinating. And it's basically that usually there's an oblique way to achieve your goal, right? This direct approach doesn't usually work in life, but there's usually some sort of back door. And I feel like this would be put into it nicely. Like, I want what I want, but actually the way to get what I want is to help you get what you want.
Yeah, or at least for you to demonstrate you understand what I want. And I've gone, yeah, that's it. Now, it doesn't have to be really scripted and clunky, a format there. pick up the nuances. Are you on the right line with where they're at? And at the end of the day, right, we all just want to be heard and understood. Even kidnappers, even pirates, even extortionists, even teenage kids, even spouses, even clients, in fact, all of us, we just want to be heard and understood. And it doesn't matter if we still disagree, but if we can disagree, and a case in point is the Trump-Zelensky conversation in the Oval Office a few weeks ago.
Brilliant.
As in terms of a masterclass about how not to communicate, let's take the politics out of it, the rights and wrongs out of it, whichever side you're on, out of it. But from a purely communication, from a conversation with a purpose, lots of gold in that. Both sides literally were making it mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake. Because I can guarantee you, neither party walked away from that thinking, yeah, that went well. I feel as if the other side really understood where I was at and the problems and the challenges I see with the situation.
So good. So good. Okay, well, let's double click on that because it's very topical at the moment. And, I think everyone's watched it. That's a perfect example of, both of them tilted, whatever you want to call it, spiraling into this negative pattern. They lost their equanimity, right? The golden rule, as you start the conversation with. What specifically do you think Zelensky did wrong, and what specifically did you think Trump did wrong?
Okay, let's start at the beginning with this. And actually, the interview is 49 minutes long. Okay, most people have only seen the last 7 minutes of that interview. Okay, so it's worth watching in its entirety for people who want to comment on this, I would suggest, first of all. Because the first 40 odd minutes aren't too bad. They're pretty reasonable. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But let's go back to key principles. There's something called a red center. If you want to learn and understand, okay, how can I best stay in this place of equanimity, this calm and objective as much as possible, rational thinking place, even though we're feeding creatures that think, not thinking creatures that feel, we're driven by emotions, we can still stay grounded. Okay. This place called a red center. And in negotiation terms, it's the geographical place where the negotiation is taking place. So a boardroom, the family's kitchen, wherever it is. But it's also, and this is something I discovered over the last 15, 20 years, it's the place within all of us. It's that inner fortress where we can tap into whenever we're faced with stress, overwhelm, conflict, difficult conversations, a bit like the Oval Office conversation. And it's something where we can retreat to, and that's where we get that inner strength of, you can say and do what you like. I'm just going to remain as unflustered as I possibly can. It doesn't mean I'm going to be robotic and not feel anything. I'm just not going to allow them to be in the driving seat. They can be the backseat driver, but they're not going to be in the driving seat, controlling the brake, the accelerator, and the steering. And so that's the first thing. I think both sides in that interview allowed their emotions to take hold. But importantly, both sides, their identities were exposed. And what I mean by that is you got Trump. Trump and people like Trump, people driven by their ego, are easy to negotiate with. Most of us would have worked for a company and organization who had a difficult boss or were ego-driven. Because what's it all about? What's it all about for having a conversation, particularly important conversation, with an ego-driven leader? I mean, we've all got an ego, but for one who really plays by it. What's it all about? It's all about them. And so if I'm sat down with Trump in the Oval Office, okay, bearing in mind America's spent lots of time and effort and money on Ukraine, I will be I'll be realizing, okay, Trump is the most powerful person in the world. He holds the purse strings. What he says goes in this conflict, rightly or wrongly. I'm going to need to demonstrate and play to that ego, okay? And it may be a bit of eating, a bit not humble pie, but actually just be mindful of that, about what does this look like to the media. But conversely, with Trump and Vance, it's actually, you don't want the other person to walk away feeling as if they've just been ridiculed and had over and simmering resentment there, because pretty much most of that last 9 minutes, 7 minutes of that interview should have taken place behind closed doors, and when it's behind closed doors, you can have those conversations without losing trust. But when the world's media are there, and then both sides thinking, well, I can't back down now in front of the media, I need to put across my point of view. And what we saw was there was lots of over talking. There was not a single bit of empathy, labeling, paraphrasing, making either side feel seen, heard, and understood. There was lots of falling into that river of emotion. There was no pausing, resetting, and choosing. They were focused on things they couldn't control. There was a lack of preparation around, well, actually, I kind of guess how the other side are going to act. And that bunch of fives I mentioned, if I was on both sides or I was advising both parties there, I'd be like, what are the 5 most objectionable, difficult, weary, antagonistic, provoking situations or comments that could be made? Okay, let's practice about how you're going to respond to it. And I think there were lots of opportunities to get it back on track, but neither side were interested in doing that. And they were stuck in this tunnel. They were both like, hey, I'm not speaking as a paragon of virtue here. I've been in conversations where it spirals and then you have to stop and literally go, right, let's just stop for a second and realize 2 hours have gone by and we've just dragged up everything from the past that's got nothing to do with this particular argument, but we've just thrown it into the mix as well because it's linked to our identity about how we see ourselves in that moment. But you're right, we could do a whole episode on frame by frame of that conversation, but it would be interesting from a learning perspective for sure.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it seems like humility is such a, you keep talking about these foundational principles. I think it's a lovely way to come at this because you talk about tactics and all these different things, but it seems like you have these sort of principles that you've drilled in, right? And they're foundationally correct. And it seems like humility is one of them. Just on the Trump thing before we leave it, you talk about blind spots, right? The J.D. Vance kind of like, firing at Zelensky, that would have been a blind spot for him of like, oh, I didn't expect the VP, someone whose status is actually below mine to attack me like that. And, if one had adequate humility and my ego isn't involved, we all have egos, as you said, I can see how that would have been slightly better. But yeah, where does humility come into all this?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, actually. I think in any conversation, but particularly important conversations you're going to have, you need to ask yourself, okay, do I and does the other person see themselves as inferior to, equal to, or superior to the other person? Because if you come into a conversation, if I came into this podcast now, interview, and I thought, okay, do you know what? I'm superior to Ben. How am I going to come across versus, actually, I'm a bit inferior. Ben's is this legend, actually, as I have done, is coming as an equal, right? Ben's got his life experiences. He's got his knowledge. He's got these skills. He's done lots of podcasts. He knows how these things work. We're just going to have a great conversation back and forth. And we're equals here. Yeah, we've got different experiences, but one is not better than the other. They just add something, they add flavor to what hopefully is a great conversation for the viewers and listeners. So it's not saying that it's right or wrong to have an inferior, equal to, or superior to. You've just got to realize what it is and be mindful about how you're going to come across, how you're going to communicate, and how the other side is. So if you're going to go into a really difficult conversation with somebody who thinks they're superior to you. Let's look at Zelensky Trump again. There's no way in a million years you're ever going to win a head-to-head conversation or an argument. You're never going to win. They would rather die literally, let alone metaphorically, than give an inch to you. So you have to kind of play their own game and spin it completely differently and approach it from a different place. But you made that point about status, and that is key in negotiation, because conflicts in negotiations are rarely about price points, terms and conditions. They're about things like status and identity, saving face, control, all this stuff that is kind of the murky stuff underneath the surface, that if we don't identify it and deal with it, that's what causes those 11th hour sabotage to deals where you think, hey, we've got this over the line, and right at the last minute, it falls apart because we hadn't dealt with this stuff that was lurking. It's like cliched elephant in the room. If it's there, bring it front and center. And in the kidnapping case, what we would do, we called it the conflict call. And pretty early on, say the kidnappers say Ben Hopkins, he was kidnapped, and they give $1 million demand for your release.
Way too high.
Way too high. Most people say not enough, but okay, so it's way too high. And do you know what? We can get 100,000 together. That's all the money we're willing and able to pay. Now, at some point, I need to manage the kidnapper's expectations. And so I'm going to come in with an initial offer. Let's just say, I know, 50,000, 40,000, 60,000, whatever. I know full well they're not going to be happy bunnies. They're going to kick and scream and threaten and make all sorts of abusive comments and threats, maybe even do a mock execution, whatever it is, just to kind of get across their displeasure. But I know this is going to happen, just like I am when I'm going to deal with somebody in business or in my private life who may kick up a bit of a scene because their status, the realization, the expectations have been shaken a bit there. But it's important to have that, get it out of the way, so then you can move on to the real negotiation, which is actually trying to get a deal.
I'd love to just shift gears to, I guess, psychological biases and things like this. I mean, I've long been interested in that kind of world and how they apply to negotiation, because from what I'm hearing you, negotiations are complex, right? And they're not just, hey, like, this is what I want, you want, like, straightforward. It seems there's a lot of sort of games and different things people do and say. So I'd love to understand more about, I guess, psychological biases and how they play into it. So, for example, you did this thing where you confirmed something back to me, right? And you said, was that how you were feeling then? Now, is that because you're trying to get a commitment and consistency out of me, or is it just generally trying to listen? But where do those things like reciprocity and commitment, consistency?
Yeah, intention matters there. If I'm doing it just to play you, to sell you, people can kind of spot that. They can smell it out. If I'm being disingenuous here and I'm being Machiavellian or manipulative in a conversation, it's not going to work. Yeah, it may work initially, but as I said to you right at the beginning of this conversation, you want a queue of people wanting to work with you, be part of your team, join your tribe, not a queue of people waiting to leave. And so intention matters. And there has to be a genuine curiosity and interest as to, am I hearing you right? You're saying this, this, and this. And so in order to move the conversation on, I need to demonstrate I'm understanding you. Now, at first, it can sound quite clunky and difficult for people to practice, but just start off with one little aspect. Just share back with the other person, a bit of mirroring or a bit of paraphrasing, like what I just demonstrated earlier. And by doing that, the other person is thinking, oh, right, Scott's making the time to understand where I'm at. And so if we're not careful, it's also being mindful of the biases as well. But that's when you do the work on yourself as part of the preparation. Is particularly in some parts of the world, you may be from a certain a rival company, a rival tribe, gang, religion, neighbor, whatever it is. And it's being aware of your own prejudices and your own biases and how they may show up. And if it's really obvious, even call it out. People want to try to hide their dirty washing, their linen, their sometimes the unhelpful things that could get in the way. They want to hide them away, but sometimes just get it out there. It's like, Ben, do you know what? I'm really unsure about working with somebody with your lack of experience in this particular field. I'll be honest with you, because actually in my experience, I like working with people who have done this, this, and this, or who believe this, this, and this. But it gives you an opportunity to go, why is that how I come across? Forgive me, sorry, there's all this other experience I've not mentioned to you. Or in the course of our conversation, I can realize, I'd rather hire Ben for his attitude and mindset because he's coming across in a really great way than for his skills or lack of skill set. Because you can train for skills. There's a saying, hire for attitude, train for skills. And the sweet spot is you get both. But I'd rather have somebody I can trust than somebody who just happens to be very good at their job. And companies are full of leaders. I'm sure we've all been there. I know I certainly have, where a leader may be very good at what they do, but there's not that much trust in that they've got my back. So if I'm going to make a mistake here, are they going to throw me under the bus for the sake of their own career? Or can I trust them if I make a genuine mistake with the best of intentions? They're going to fight my corner for me and make sure it's all going to be okay. We're going to learn from it and then put steps in place so it doesn't happen again. And so that whole trust versus performance, attitude and skills is something that if you want to get on, no matter what your context or situation in life, it's important to understand that usually attitude will beat skills every time.
Mm. Well, it's nice that you started this conversation with people. What surprised you most is actually most people are good, right? And I think if you give that trust, you'll get met with it back. But there's a small group of people who probably won't. They will screw you and things, but if you don't give it out, you miss the majority. It will be, win-win and positive moving forward. I imagine.
And the thing with the trust is, it's if you want to trust other people, if you want people to trust you, you first need to be trusting. And yet we set the bar really low. I mean, really low for people to trust us. Because of course we're trustworthy, but no one else is. Yet we set the bar really high in order for us to trust other people. They have to go to the moon and back before we trust them to follow through. There's a real mismatch there. But the golden thread through all successful long-term negotiations is trust. I had to build trust with kidnappers I had nothing in common with. I didn't want to go for a beer or coffee with them. They were threatening to kill the hostages. They were putting all the family and the company through hell. You had to build trust. And which is why there is a 93% chance of people coming back from a negotiation, hostages being released from a negotiation, because of the trust. That's what it is. In an industry that is the most unregulated, governed, dangerous one in the world.
Jesus. So how do you even begin is it, you're trying to find some common ground, or, I've got a kid, you've got a kid, how do you do it?
Because I've got nothing in common with them in that respect. Trust is often built by, do I follow through with what I say I'm going to do? If we're going to be here on the call tomorrow between 2 and 4 to come up with another offer for you in terms of how much money we put together, then I'm going to be on the call between 2 and 4. And if I say I'm going to do something, I actually follow through with it. And it's all these little micro actions that we can do, not just in a kidnap negotiation, but in the home, at work, is you want people to go, yeah, do you know what? When it gets really difficult, when the challenges start piling up, when it starts to get really busy or difficult, I want that person next to me because I can trust them. They're going to have my back. They're going to put their effort in. They've got a work ethic. And actually, do you know what? They're likable. And we often underestimate the importance of likability. There's a difference between likability and wanting to be liked. The latter is where you're seeking external validation, and the former, being likable, is you just showing up with a really good intent, looking to seek first to understand, managing your own emotions, looking to validate or reciprocate or demonstrate your understanding of whether other people are at. And so there's a big difference there. So never underestimate the power of likability in getting a deal done.
That's it's simple but not easy, right? I think that's but it's nice because you can get lost in tactics, but then you sort of swim upstream and you can find things that, as we're talking about now, these sort of core principles to keep in mind. Scott, you're a fascinating man. I could talk to you all day, and I can't believe we're almost at the hour, which is crazy. I honestly had no idea. Flown by. You've got a new book coming out called Eye of the Storm. But before we get to that, I'd love to just ask, tell us about your first book, and then what does your second book cover that your first book doesn't?
Yeah, the first book, All Out of Chaos, took 4 years to write. It was all the lessons and insights I'd learned from 15 plus years and 300 cases going around the world. And I realized it didn't matter what industry or sector or geography or culture I was working in. There were certain themes and patterns that showed up about what did the high-performing teams, the leaders, the individuals, what did they do in those difficult times to secure a win in a negotiation? And I put all that into the book, and people can apply those tools and techniques to their personal and private life. So that took 4 years to write. And the second one took a lot less, Eye of the Storm, which was, it's not the follow-on from that. And this is really about, okay, you've learned the basics in order out of chaos about what to do and what not to do. But the second one, Eye of the Storm, how to make good decisions in bad situations, takes it a step further. And most books on decision making, particularly in difficult situations, will give you a flow chart or a graphic or these different steps to take. But why are we all walking around making excellent decisions? They're all just a Google click away, all of those things are. And I realized there are 3 things that get in the way of making good decisions in bad situations, which is what we think, the thoughts we allow to show up in our heads, the feelings we have, how the emotions can either let us make good decisions or bad situations. And the final bit is the actions we take. Our behavior either gets in the way of or helps us make those good decisions. So our thoughts, our feelings, and our behavior. And so that book is all about how can you really master what you think, what you feel, and what you do to get you into a great place that you're more likely to make better decisions than not, particularly when you've got the storm raging all around you. And so, yeah, that's out on May the 20th. It's available to pre-order now.
Beautiful. Well, we'll put both books links in the show notes. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest from our community. The tradition on this podcast, we usually end with some quick fire questions, if that's all good. Love it. Okay. First one is, do you have, in the last 5-10 years, have you picked up any protocol, health practice, you name it, that's made a meaningful influence on your life?
Surprisingly simple and easy protocol that I've learned was, and it's an immediate result, is just when things start to get a bit much, when the overwhelm starts to kick in, when you start to get a bit dizzy with everything that's going on, it's simply to feel your feet on the floor, to actually bring your attention to the soles of your feet on the floor, because so many of us will get caught up in the moment, in the doing, in the activity, in our thoughts, in our head, just spinning around, stuck on the loop. But just bringing the attention, the focus to the soles of your feet on the floor, it has a way of just grounding you, centering you. Remember that pause, reset, choose. So now, no matter what I'm doing, that really helps, and it works instantly, and no one needs to know that you're even doing it.
Love that. I mean, there's a practical takeaway of how to apply your golden rule, right? A tactic to help keep your emotional fortitude. Okay, brilliant. Last question for you, Scott, although could speak to you all day. What important truth do you believe that very few people agree with you on?
Wow. I think the one that's probably quite unpopular these days, but in my experience has stood me and others in good stead, is your life is a direct reflection of your excuses. So your health, your body, your finances, your relationships, your work, it's down to your excuses you're giving yourself, and it's around having this agency to do something about it.
Wonderful answer. Well, Scott Walker, thank you very much for coming on. We'll put both your books in the show notes, Order Out of Chaos and Eye of the Storm.
Yeah, that's it.
Where else can we find you? Where's your social handles, and where can we keep up to date?
Yeah, on Instagram at Scott Walker Negotiator. And if people want to go a lot deeper on this material, I've got a course running, liveunderpressure.co. They can go there and find out more and sign up to the course for that as well.
Brilliant. Well, Scott, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on. That was so fun. And yeah, can't thank you enough.
Welcome.